Did you know that the Dyatlov Pass incident wasn't the only one of its kind? So many people died in the Soviet mountains, it's almost unbelievable. I had no idea it was such a prevalent phenomenon until I did a bit of research for this video. You can check it out once you finish this one if you want. But you know what? I'm actually not sure if I would call it a phenomenon. Young people just didn't have much else to do back then, and more people in the mountains just meant more victims. Plus, let's face it, the gear wasn't the best back then in the 1950s, 1980s in the Soviet Union. But today, we are not going to be talking about some inexperienced students who just wanted to have some fun. I'm gonna take you to the Sochondo Nature Reserve, Sochondinski Zapoviednik, in eastern Siberia and tell you about the horrible, unexplainable death of a scientific employee, Mikhail Orlov, and his group. No что, давайте начнем. In 1982, 25-year-old Mikhail Orlov worked as a scientific employee at the Sochondo Nature Reserve. It was his dream job. Mikhail had graduated from the Faculty of Biology at Gorky University, and during his practice training, he fell in love with the wildlife of Trans-Baikalia. That's exactly why he decided to move to Siberia and work at the reserve. Mikhail spent a lot of time with another Sochondo scientific employee, Sergei Konkin, who was only 24 years old. The men allegedly looked alike, but we have no way to confirm that claim because no photos of Sergei exist, or at least none are publicly available. Sergei had also graduated from the same university and landed a job in the scientific department of the Sochondo Reserve, Sochondinski Zapoviednik. I love how it sounds in Russian. Both men were deeply involved in studying the wildlife of Trans-Baikal region, and one of their tasks was to count animals. These surveys were typically done in the winter when snow covered the ground, which of course made animal footprints visible and easier to track. This method was called Zimny Marshrutny Uchot. More often than not, these censuses were conducted once or twice a year, usually in December, January or February. Occasionally, depending on the species and conditions, they could also be done in late autumn. To make sure these counts were as accurate as possible, the same routes were typically walked twice by two separate groups of scientists, with a short interval between them. This exact same method was also being used at Sochondo. Mikhail and Sergei would be part of the second group, which would follow the first. This meant they would have it a bit easier, and yet something so horrific and totally unexplainable would happen to them. The second group had 4 members. We already know about Mikhail and Sergei. They would be joined by 28-year-old forester Igor Bakholdin and his beloved 27-year-old wife Tatyana Terechova. They had a little son, Bolshoi Zemlya, with whom they planned to spend New Year's Eve. They were allowed to join this expedition group and then leave the station so they could be with their boy. All 4 of them were healthy young individuals with enough food, equipment, and most importantly, they were all very experienced and knew the area well. Plus, all treks were taking place during the day, and the scientists would go from one winter cabin to another, where they would spend the night. It was all well thought out. They'd done it multiple times before. On the morning of December 24th, Bakholdin sent a radio message to the base station. He informed them that his group was departing on the trail. This was his last haunting message. The weather that day was actually quite good for the time of year, late December. The sky was clear, no snowfall was expected, and the maximum daytime temperature should have been as low as minus 17 degrees Celsius. The morning was a bit colder, with the air temperature dropping to minus 22 degrees. That might seem extreme to us, but for people living in Siberia, it's probably not that unusual. Actually, I don't know. All 4 had skis, but they didn't use them much because they were able to walk part of the way on foot. Plus, that day they only needed to cover 16 kilometers from the Ingoda station to the Birkichta winter cabin, following in the steps of the first group, which meant the trail was well established and easy to follow. The most challenging part of the expedition was Birkichtinian mountain, but all of them were in great physical condition and well prepared if the weather changed suddenly, how it often does in the mountains. They were dressed in multiple layers of warm clothes and even had some spare pieces in their backpacks, just in case. You never know what might happen. They also had some dumplings with them, which were super easy and quick to prepare if someone had a crisis and needed to refuel somehow. The expedition was armed as well with hunting rifles, one of which belonged to Orlov. So the first group successfully completed the 16-kilometer hike past the intermediate point at the Birkichta cabin and were waiting for Orlov's group at the Aguca station. This first part from Ingoda to Birkichta took them around 6 hours to complete, and they had no incidents along the way. But mysteriously, the second group never made it to the cabin. They had just 2 kilometers left when something happened, after which all of them died. It was only 20 to 25 minutes of walking and they would have been in the cabin, but they stopped on the slope. Mikhail separated from the group, supposedly to check something or find a way, which doesn't make sense because they weren't lost, and then they all died. The first group was waiting for them at the Aguca station, where they had arrived on the evening of December 25th, but Orlov's group never came. They were supposed to show up within a day, but they didn't. After waiting for Orlov's group for 2 days, the head of the reserve, Viktor Yashnov, began organizing a search operation. Yashnov's assistant reached the village of Altan on December 27th, then took a bus to the settlement of Kira, where he was finally able to report that the second group had gone missing. It would all have been quicker if the group had a radio with them, but sadly, they didn't. No one had back then. However, the search couldn't start right away because Sochoninsky Zapovednik was just that remote. But when it finally began, everyone who could and was available participated. This is how it felt when they found the bodies. Birkichtinian mountain. The summit is covered with a blanket of snow. The sky is overcast, it's snowing, and there is a strong wind. Footprints heading from west to east were found. 100 meters from the start of the tracks, a hunting rifle was found, stuck into the snow, butt down, with the barrel pointing up. There were also 3 pairs of skis lying there. Nearby, open backpacks were scattered, half buried by snow. Sergei, Igor, and his wife Tatiana were found dead and completely frozen on December 30th. And the fourth body, belonging to 25-year-old Mikhail Orlov, was finally located only at the beginning of January. He was lying just a few hundred meters from his colleagues, and yet it took so long to find him. The case documents, which are public and can now be accessed by anyone, give us a detailed description of all the bodies and the state in which they were found. Tatiana Terechova and Sergei Konkin were lying just a meter and a half apart, and the oldest member of the group, Igor Bakholdin, was 26 meters away from them. The position of the bodies was completely unusual and more than strange. They were lying on their backs and they had multiple scratches and bruises. Their clothes were partially unbuttoned, or in some cases even missing, which doesn't make sense at all if you think about it. Take for example Tatiana Terechova. She would be found lying on her back, face up. Her arms are spread out to the sides, with her fingers clenched into fists. There is a mitten on her right hand, but not on her left. The head is tilted back and her eyes are open. Her face has a pale red hue and her lips are dark red. There are multiple linear scratches with skin damage on the fingers of her left hand and on the back of her hand. On her left wrist, she is wearing a Vostok brand watch. The hands of the watch show the time, 5:22 p.m. Clothing: a fur-lined coat, button only the top two and bottom buttons. The coat is pulled up toward the chest, leaving her lower back exposed. Under the coat, she is wearing a denim jacket and a sweater, woolen pants, long underwear and stockings, felt boots on her feet, matches. Matches are scattered on her left cheek and chest. She is missing a head covering, and 1 meter away from her feet, crimpling pants were found, along with a woman's sweater and a padded blanket 2 meters away. Nearby there are felt boots, a plastic bag with dumplings, and a hat. Now let's move on to Igor Bakholdin. He is also lying on his back and his head is tilted back. His face is dark red and his eyes are slightly open. The fingers of his hands are clenched into fists. There are multiple linear scratches with skin damage on his fingers and on the backs of his hands. On his left wrist he is wearing a Luch brand watch. The watch has stopped and the hands show the time, 5:27 p.m. Clothing: a padded jacket and a woolen sweater. The jacket is unbuttoned and the sweater is pulled up to his chin, exposing his abdomen. He is wearing padded pants with sweatpants underneath. He has boots on his feet and in his pockets are matches and Belomor cigarettes. And now the body of Sergei Konkin. His head is tilted back, his mouth and eyes are open, his nose and ear cavities are filled with snow, his left arm is bent at the elbow toward his abdomen. On his left wrist is a Raketa brand watch. The watch has stopped and the hands show the time, 6:27 p.m. Konkin's clothing: a windbreaker, jacket, sweater, woolen scarf, shirt, mittens, pants and sweatpants. In the pocket of his pants there is a notebook. The last entry is dated December 24th and reads, Cedar Grove on the ascent. However, what doesn't make sense at all is that if a person is dying from hypothermia, they usually bundle up and crouch, not unbutton their coat and lie on their back. Their eyes are typically closed because they slowly fall into a final deep sleep. But this looked like a sudden death. And why wasn't Mikhail with them? As I mentioned, his body was found almost a week later, some distance away from his companions. He was the only one who died in a typical pose, his arms bent at the elbows toward his abdomen and his legs slightly bent. So let me tell you more about the state in which he was found. The body of Mikhail Orlov is covered with snow and lies in a shallow pit. Under the body are cedar branches. His head is nearby, his eyes are slightly open and his face is pale purple. His arms are bent at the elbows toward his abdomen and his legs are slightly bent. The posture of a freezing person, like I said. On his left wrist he is wearing a Vostok brand watch. The hands are frozen at 7:59 p.m. Clothing: a padded jacket buttoned all the way up and belted. There is a notebook in his pocket. The last entry is from December 24th at 3:45 p.m. A pencil is tied to the notebook with a string. Over the padded jacket, a binocular strap and a hunting rifle are slung across his body. A hunting knife is on his belt. 2 meters from the body, a backpack lies in the snow. 5 meters away is an axe. 28 meters away, a blue tennis shirt. 46 meters away, a pot in a bag. 56 meters away, a bag of dumplings. 62 meters away, a men's shirt. And 118 meters away, a sleeping bag. Orlov was found by Anatoly Sakyaev. He wasn't undressed or unbuttoned in any way, and there were no bruises on his body. No one knows why Mikhail was throwing items out of his backpack. Was he trying to leave a trail? What did he know? Was he running from someone or something? But if so, why would he leave the trail? Anyway, the bodies were so frozen that an autopsy couldn't be performed for several days. They had to wait, but even then, the forensic expert was unable to determine the exact time of death due to the severe frostbite the bodies had suffered. In the end, the specialists decided to use the time shown by the stopped watches of the deceased as the approximate time of death. Almost no alcohol was found in the victims' bodies. Only in Bakholdian's blood did the specialists find an insignificantly small amount, which in no way could have influenced the tragic outcome of the expedition. What also needs to be said is that the blood was tested only for alcohol. The content of other chemical elements wasn't examined at all. So if there had been any radiation, we wouldn't know. But what we do know is that there were no storms, earthquakes, or any extreme weather that day. It seems as though 4 young, experienced individuals in great physical and mental condition died during what should have been an uncomplicated hike. And what's more, they died just a 20-minute walk from the nearest cabin. Their backpacks were full of food and warm clothes, yet somehow they still died. It just doesn't make sense. However, the forensic expert concluded that there were no signs of a struggle or self-defense and that the cause of death was hypothermia, even though the bodies were scratched, bruised, and partially undressed. And while some people claim the cause of death might have been a sudden loss of strength, scientists believe that there is no such phenomena, meaning you wouldn't suddenly feel so exhausted that even knowing the warm cabin is just 2 kilometers away, you would choose to lie down and freeze to death, rather than continue and save yourself. We also know that the investigator from the Kira District Prosecutor's Office sent a request to the Trans-Baikalia Research Institute. He wanted to know if there were any natural phenomena on Berkichtenjang that could suddenly affect the body, making it difficult to breathe, causing general weakness, and preventing a person from moving, potentially even leading to unconsciousness. The director of the institute simply responded: "Наш институт не располагает данными о природных явлениях в районе Голца Berkichtenjang." However, the people living in the village of Kira knew exactly what had happened. They knew who did it. It was duch miasta Burhan, an unfriendly mountain spirit who lived on Berkichten near Mount Chikonda. The local native people would always ask the spirit's permission before visiting his domain. Maybe the young people broke some sacred rule and this mountain spirit punished them. Back then, some local people also believed in the Trans-Baikal Yeti, who would often frighten people to death. But these are just legends, nothing more.